final time before the NFL draft. We're going to be breaking down his pre-draft presser, talking about all the different topics that he brought up, all after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3, dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. We've got a special guest today, John Chapman, obviously of the 49ers Rush podcast. How you doing today, man?
I am living the dream. It is draft week. We are days away. We've got NFL trades happening. We've got 49ers news, and I'm here with you, Rohan, and I couldn't be more excited, man.
Before we get into the 49ers content, let's just go on the very, very small trade. It obviously
Tiny.
Nothing too big. Aaron Rodgers, what were your thoughts on that move that just happened finally after, weeks and weeks of speculation?
Yeah, I mean, everybody knew it was going to happen. I thought that the Jets paid more than I would have guessed. I would have assumed it would have been a lot less just because he's so old. That contract's so big. He talked about retiring. And so I thought the Packers got a good deal. My first thought was, man, he's going to retire defeated by the 49ers in the playoffs, never getting one win versus the 49ers, and that just makes me happy. I'm not a Rodgers guy, so so that's the big winners are the 49ers, or maybe losers because they were a bye in the playoffs for so long. Those were my initial thoughts.
Aaron Rodgers' deal was interesting. I do agree. I think they gave up more than I initially expected, but at this point, you don't really care. You got to get the deal done with the way that the draft's going. I didn't expect, the main surprise for me was the pick swap. I didn't expect the first rounders to be swapped because that's still a good amount of value that you're giving up moving down from 13 to 15. That was the main difference, but they did get some, I think, a fifth rounder or sixth rounder in return as well. Solid deal. And now,
to put a
that
pick
one's
swap into context, dropping from 13 to 15 has a 100-point value difference on Jimmy Johnson's trade chart. That is the exact value of the 100 pick. So that's basically a late, third round comp pick that was thrown in there. I really do think that the Packers got a lot more than I was not anticipating that. I was thinking 1 second and a conditional third. But yeah, they got a lot more.
And I'd assume that 2024 conditional first is definitely dependent on him playing, maybe even him making the playoffs. We'll see what happens there. But overall, in this class, I want to talk to you about real quick. Finally, Rodgers to the 49ers. We don't got to worry about that anymore. But there was one other quarterback bit external before we get to all the internal stuff, and that was Lamar Jackson. John Lynch quickly mentioned Lamar Jackson, said that right now there's little room to operate based on their current roster situation. Initially, pretty much shutting down the door as they did a couple of months ago. Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what was important is how John Lynch basically explained it. Like, look, we've built our roster a certain way with financials, with the way we build, with the way we play, and all those things. And because of that, it completely okay, I'll get an email from somebody that's like, hey, why don't we trade for Joey Bosa or fill in the blank? It doesn't matter who it is. And I'm like, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. The 49ers would be great. But now we have to look at the numbers. 1, what are you going to give up? 2, does the salary cap work? And 3, would the other team want to do this? And almost all of those discussions, probably 95%, get shut down at the salary cap. Niners don't have any money. They have no money. And you're talking about Lamar Jackson, who wants a fully guaranteed deal. You can't fit that. It just doesn't work because of the way they've built it. So all the people that are huge on Kirk Cousins, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, fill in the blank, fill in the blank, fill in the blank. They don't fit financially with the way in which this front office has built a team. That's why those things aren't going to happen.
I agree. And the other thing is, one thing Lynch alluded to, not only with free agency, but also the draft. And he talked about it when talking about Brandon Ayuk, which we'll get to, is you don't worry just about year one. Remember, you're giving up a 4 to 5 year extension to a guy like Lamar Jackson. You have to worry about future years as well. Year two, year three, year four, year five, and how the cap figures out there. The 49ers are already in somewhat of a cap crunch next year. Lynch alluded to we're going to have to figure that out when presenting an extension to Brandon Ayuk because you do have a couple of situations to figure out. Nick Bosa, that cap hit in the next year or in next year is going to be a little higher than you'd anticipate, understanding he's going to command such a high salary in general on an average value. And so you've got a couple of different things that you've got to worry about that are still yet to be determined. And that's not even involving bringing back free agents that will be free agents next year. There are still players up for extensions. Talanoa Hufanga might be up soon. You've got Brandon Ayuk, obviously. Nick Bosa's extension needs to be dealt with. You've got a couple of players that you start needing to think about in the short term future, and you understand. Yeah, it might be unfeasible unless you continuously restructure contracts. By then, if you don't end up getting that Super Bowl, you're in cap hell for a few years. That is.
I think one of my favorite things, and I love the comment by Greg Khan there. He says, they can make Ayuk and Samuel fit with staggered restructures. We're starting to see, the Niners are doing one big deal a year. They did two this year. With whether you want to see CMC or Nick Bosa, or if you want to throw in Javon Hargrave. But now you're starting to see some guys leave too. We saw Laken leave a year ago. We saw Jimmy Ward just now leave. So like, as long as you're sticking with this cyclical, kind of revolving door. I hate that term, but like good guys are leaving, but you're replacing with new young good guys as well. The rookie contracts will off balance. And so it's going to be difficult. It's the longer you continue to do this, especially with void years, the more difficult it's going to be. But for the near future, I think that the 49ers could continue to juggle this fairly well. We'll have to see what happens if no players leave. Like, let's just say hypothetically, which this would be a great problem to have. Let's say Trent Williams plays for another 3 years. I don't think that's very logical. I don't think it's going to happen. But if he does, that's awesome because you've got the best left tackle of football. But those numbers are going to be kind of tough to juggle eventually. So if some of those players do start kind of retiring or moving on or whatever, that's going to be some of the relief to keep these wheels churning, to keep that window open, so to speak.
Right. And even if it's not necessarily restructures, when you talk about Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, Greg Khan's right in that you could stagger those contracts because Samuel's deal ends in 2025. You're not going to likely be able to move him. You can't move him this offseason. Really tough to pre-June 1st next offseason. But before that final year of his contract, that's when I think you can consider moving Deebo Samuel. And for Brandon Ayuk in his contract, you can think about it as if next year will be the first year of his deal. That cap it can be lowered, and then in 2025, when it starts to get higher, that's when you can move on from Deebo Samuel and have that one significant wide receiver contract while trying to replenish that value in the draft.
Yeah, and we saw, about the Deebo like trade possibility in the future. You saw that with Tyreek Hill. You saw it with Devontae Adams. These vets that were on the last year of their big deal wanting to get that third deal. And Deebo fought for a 3-year extension. He got it, and I'm happy for him. He deserves to get paid. But yeah, I think that's where those numbers can start to play into your advantage. And we'll just kind of have to see how Deebo's career goes. I want to keep him. I want him to be a lifelong 49er. But in the modern NFL, those things are tough to do. But I'm not stressed. I'm not stressed about the Ayuk and Deebo deals for this year or next year at all. I would love to have a prop bet where I could say, what are the chances Deebo and Ayuk are both on this roster for the next 2 years? I'd freaking lay down the farm, man, because the numbers back up. And why would you get rid of one of your stud wide receivers when you have all these young quarterbacks? Yeah, why would you make it harder on them? That doesn't make sense.
And that's why initially I was a proponent of the Deebo Samuel extension. I know a lot of people weren't necessarily as high, and I shared the reasoning behind it. Samuel was going to have some level of regression after such a significant year in 2021. But the reason you're paying Samuel isn't because you expect him to replicate that production, especially with more talent coming on the board in Christian McCaffrey, and also the emergence of Brandon Ayuk that you expected last year. You're paying him because you have a cheap quarterback deal and you have young quarterbacks who need to develop. And the best way to develop that quarterback is via a top talented, an uber talented receiver like Debo Samuel that makes life easier by operating well on screens, taking balls out of the backfield, and the different ways that he impacts the game. And because of the way that his contract's it's a smaller contract in terms of length, you can fit it to where it fits with the length of your rookie quarterback contracts. And so I think that that's where you're trying to figure it out and make things work. And that's why it's valuable, even if that value in terms of statistical output may not necessarily have been seen.
Yeah, it's I'm very impressed by what the Niners have done because they haven't done the Rams, all right, we're all in. If we don't win it this year, then it's all for naught. And then they won it, which congrats to them. It was close. They got a lot of help, but like the Niners are going to be relevant for a very long time. The fact that they've done what they have done, 3 out of 4 NFC championships without a top 5 quarterback, like even close, that's crazy to me because the roster, the skeleton it's fit. If you could just get that quarterback position figured out. We got 3 young chances, 3 swings currently on the roster with Darnold, Trey Lance, and Brock. If one of those guys just take that huge leap forward, man, this could be a dangerous, dangerous team for a long, long time.
I agree. I agree. Moving on to some of the big things that our guy John Lynch talked about. Let's start with the quarterback position. Let's start with the guy who's been in the media headlines recently. Last week, Ian Rappaport reported that the 49ers have been fielding calls on Trey Lance, haven't really amounted to much. Today, John Lynch provided some clarity on the Trey Lance debacle. What did you take away from his comments?
Man, I thought it was more of the same. Everybody in the media wants to blow this out of proportion, and I just don't see it. I can't find legs to it. John Lynch said, we've been really honest with Trey. We're taking calls on pretty much everybody except Bosa. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But he says, I fully expect Trey to be with our team. And, I keep going back to this same concept, and John mentioned today, we needed 5 quarterbacks last year. Why in the world would you be in such a move to get rid of one of those quarterbacks for what? A second round pick? That makes no sense to me. The 49ers need quarterbacks more than any other franchise out there in the NFL currently. Because one, Brock Purdy, we don't know where he is. So I don't know. I didn't take this as, oh man, they're actively shopping and whatever else. I just don't get that. I 100% don't understand that. I don't know.
I agree. And when we talk about Lance, I thought it would be irresponsible. Me and Marco said this last week to move on from Lance before giving him the opportunity to compete when you understand what your quarterback room is like. And John Lynch even acknowledged today that a part of the Lance discussion is also due to Purdy and right now the uncertainty in regards to his health. The 12-week mark would provide more clarity, but that's in June. You don't gamble on it a month before and understand what your quarterback situation might look like, because even if best case scenario it's that 6-month timeline and Purdy's back by week 1, you still have a significant portion of practice, if not all of practice in the offseason, where you're not rolling with Purdy, and you need 3 healthy quarterbacks. The 49ers aren't even at 3 healthy quarterbacks right now. They
We're at
need
2.
to add to their quarterback room with a rookie or an undrafted free agent. Is it the smartest option to go into the offseason hedging your bets on Darnold and 2 rookies or undrafted free agents? I don't know if that's the smartest thing for a team to do with the situation the 49ers are in and being the second most favorite to win the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, the NFC continues, and we see this today. You look at the top quarterbacks in this league, I would argue 9 out of 10 of the top quarterbacks are all in the AFC. I mean, it's that big of a disparity. It's huge. And so you look at the NFC, it's a 2-horse race. It's just 2 teams. the Eagles and the 49ers. I don't consider the Cowboys to be there with their head coach. And the Vikings, I have no credibility whatsoever for that franchise either. Maybe they take strides, whatever else. You talk regular season records. Don't care. Until the Cowboys can get past the divisional round, whatever. It's been since 1995 since they've gotten past the divisional round. They can't win in the postseason. Why? Coaching decisions top down. Jerry Jones percolates that entire franchise, and it's just a bunch of bad choices. And so, like, the Niners have this pass, so you have to seize this opportunity. Why in the world would you jeopardize that by trading the one healthy young quarterback that you have on your team? Sam Darnold's healthy as well, but it's hard to get credence to this. It really, really is. I see the comment in there from TC just talking about how this is so stressful and the Trey Lance and all that kind of stuff that's going on. Let me just say this. None of this is coming from the 49ers. This is coming from outside, whether it's national media, local content creators that are trying to create drama to get it's clickbait stuff, right? And so, like, I just constantly say, man, if you are one of those people where the drama and the stress like start to affect your fandom and your enjoyment, man, protect that stuff. If that's who you are, don't allow that crap into your podcast, whatever, YouTube views, whatever. Like, protect that. Some people love that, but protect your fandom like that. Like, don't let people steal your joy. You should be happy to be a Niners fan right now. We are 3 out of 4 at NFC championships. This is a great time to be a
Very
49
true.
fan.
And with that said, I do want to give a shout out to the guys that have tuned in, because we've got a lot of people dropping your comments, and we really do appreciate you guys,
Yes.
especially, this week going into the draft. I know John's got a very cool setup for the draft night. And so as I go out sharing some comments, go ahead and share some details on that for this week.
Yeah, we're going to be live days 1 and day 2 of the draft, nonstop. We're going to start 10 minutes before night 1 on Thursday. So 10 minutes before, you just tune us in, and then 10 minutes before on Friday as well for day 2. So you're talking 10 plus hours over 2 days being live. Going to have a lot of people with us: Wayne Breezy, Brian Carter, at host Chuck B. I'm trying to get Rohan on with us day 2. But yeah, so if you want some 49ers NFC West kind of focused content for days 1 and day 2, that's where just type in John Chapman or 49ers Rush. Come join us. Both those are already up on my channel, so you can go hit the notification bell and join us live. We're going to be giving away a lot of jerseys. We're going to be having a good time. I'm trying to put together a drinking game right now for those of you that are going to partake. It's going to be a good time.
Hey, you heard it here. Going to be a great time, and I will try my best to make sure I join on for Friday. Obviously Friday being day 2 of the draft, 49ers having some picks as well at the end of that day, maybe even earlier, depending on a trade up. It's going to be a fun time. Make sure you guys check it out. Want to give a shout out to the CC gang, as always, for tuning in early with your guys' comments. And for everybody else that's tuned in so far, thank you. Going back, though, to the Trey Lance discussion, let's talk about obviously now what does this mean for the competition? Did it sound to you like John Lynch is expecting the 49ers to give Trey Lance a chance to compete in 2023?
100%. Yeah. And, when John Lynch was asked about Trey and if he's been telling them and talking to him about these like trade whatever, he's like, dude, Trey just wants a chance to compete here. And that's what we're setting this up for. And so it's got to be a competition, which is what fans should want. I consider myself to be one of the biggest Trey guys ever. If he can't beat out Sam Darnold, then I don't think he deserves the job. But I do have confidence in the fact that he will. Again, I'll if I could bet who's taking the first snap, this week 1, it's going to be Trey Lance. Not that that's the most important thing, because Trey Lance took week 1 snap last year. But again, played 5 quarters and then it was done, the injury, whatever else. The situation will work itself out organically. The cream rises to the top. If you're going to have 2 people competing, Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, all through training camp, may the best player win, because that's what we want as Niners fans. I do think that will be Trey Lance, but if it's not, that's okay. This is not a Trey Lance hat. It's a 49ers hat I got on. You pull for the guy under center, no matter who it is, and that's what's up. I think you're muted there. I think you muted.
There we go. We're better.
Now we're
But one
back. Now
thing
we're
I'll
back.
say is I think what Trey Lance wants, what the 49ers organization wants, is to now provide him a chance to compete.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know necessarily if I agree whether the smoke screens are put out by the 49ers themselves or whether they're put out by the media. I do think, honestly, the 49ers might have a little bit of doing in it in the way that it's obviously transpired. Obviously, we hear one thing today, it's that the 49ers were fielding calls from Trey Lance last week, potentially saying, oh, a draft day trade might be happening. But then you hear today, 49ers are going to wait till training camp. They're going to wait till training camp. And if a team calls, maybe you see him with an injury. Maybe you see him go traded there for the opportunity for a starting spot. But what I got from today is they want him to compete. John Lynch said, I expect him to be here in 2023. Obviously, you can't necessarily believe everything you hear, but it seems like they're going to want Trey Lance to compete, which is understandable, understanding what their current situation is. And so to me, as for the competition, I do believe that right now they're going to let Trey Lance get out there. Obviously, if he beats out Sam Darnold and he looks comfortable, I think he ends up getting the week one starting job while Purdy recovers. But if not, they're going to roll with Purdy. If they don't
Yeah.
see what they see in Trey Lance, then you essentially punt on the experiment that you had 3 years ago, and you roll with the guy that you believe in the most at the moment, which is Brock Purdy.
And I'll say this, one season in 10 years of the 49ers playing football have we had a quarterback start every single game. That was 2019 when Jimmy G took us to the Super Bowl, right? So, like, this idea of whoever the quarterback is week one, I get it, but guess what? Stuff happens, football happens with their 5 quarterbacks last year. There's going to be injuries, guys. The idea of the 49, eh, Patrick Mahomes got hurt last year, missed time in the playoffs. Jalen Hurts got hurt. He missed time leading up to the playoffs. Like, injuries happen in this sport, period. And guess what? It's going to happen again this year. So you don't need one guy. You got to have at least two. In the 49ers situation now, they have 3. They're going to add another quarterback in the draft, I assume. That'd be 4. And it's going to work itself out. So, like, even if your guy isn't the guy week
Exactly.
one, just take a deep breath. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there are going to be 4 quarterbacks. I'd anticipate the guy they draft is going to be a guy who ends up being on the practice squad year one, guy they cut practice squad, and then eventually comes up and potentially takes the Sam Darnold role next year. Obviously, assuming the 49ers have a quarterback situation figured out. And so I think that they've got a couple of things. And before I move on, there was another piece of news that came out today on one of those quarterbacks. Jake Haener, 49ers had a pre-draft visit with the Fresno State standout. He's a guy who's received a lot of buzz. I know you and I have both done our work on the NFL draft. What can you tell me about this visit, especially after they visited with another expected to be a mid-round guy in DTR last week?
Yeah, it's funny. Lynch said, there's a lot of stuff about the guys we're bringing out and whatever else. But, some of these guys were doing work for 3 to 4 years down the road, whatever else. Sam Darnold, right? Like, that's the idea. Maybe this isn't a guy we could draft, but this is some we want to know more about. Jake Hader's fun. He's old. He's 24 years old. He's already older than Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. He's been labeled the Brock Purdy of this draft. He's smaller guy, 6'1". He's got better arm strength than Purdy does, but just not a lead anywhere. Played a lot of games, 32 college games, and he just kind of fits that gamer mentality. I don't know. I've got a 4th round grade on him. So this is somebody that if you wanted, you'd have to take with one of those 3rd round picks. I don't see it.
Right.
But hey, they're doing their work. And if they falls to the 5th round, maybe that's a swing that you're willing to take.
That's the big question in that. To me, the issue with drafting a guy like Jake Haener or Dorian Thompson Robinson is that I don't know if either quarterback makes it past waivers. The 49ers had this same issue with Brock Purdy last year after a solid preseason. Remember, training camp was up and down for Brock Purdy, but he had a solid preseason that's on display for everybody. And that made that made the 49ers worry themselves that they weren't going to be able to keep him. These 2 players have gotten a good amount of buzz. And remember, this is also a quarterback class where it fizzles out after the top few options. Hendon Hooker has even been described as a guy who could go early in the top 2 rounds. And so you've got that next bunch of guys. And normally with a position like quarterback, they might not they don't stay on the board that long. So you might see them go a little earlier, understanding the gap between maybe the top four, top five guys, and then the rest of the bunch. Do I think the 49ers end up with a quarterback throughout this entire process? Absolutely. They're going to get one. I just wonder who exactly that player is going to be, understanding you're going to likely have to cut him it might not be week one. Let's say Purdy, for some reason, goes on IR or even on PUP. You're still going to have to cut him. It might not be week one, but you're going to have to cut him at week 4 or week 8 to create that roster spot. And I think that you've got to understand that if you want to keep this player, whoever you're investing a pick in, it
Right.
depends on what that player's got to be. And so you might look to take value at another position where the board might favor out as well.
Yeah, I agree there. And yeah, to somebody's question, Greg, as he said, is Jake Hader smaller than Purdy? They're the exact same height, like just 6 foot and some change. Purdy was actually 5 pounds heavier at 212. So Purdy a little bit thicker than Hader, but they're almost identical as far as body types go.
Yeah, that's true. And I like this question here. Why use a pick on a player you have to cut? Now, it might not seem like it, but especially for teams in a situation like the 49ers, where your roster is already it's pretty talented, you're not going to be able to draft or utilize all your selections on players that are going to make your 53-man roster. And that's the value of having these UDFAs and things like that, where your players like that you can stash on the practice squad because they then can rise. The 49ers have had this system before. Nate Sudfeld was a guy who ended up being on the practice squad and then competed for the job last year. And obviously he didn't end up getting it, but there are guys like that. Marcelino McCrary-Ball, we've seen it from the linebacker group a lot, where you've had Marcelino McCrary-Ball, Demetrius London-Fowles, and all these different UDFAs that have ended up making the roster. And so why use a pick on a player you have to cut? Obviously, when drafting them, you're initially not looking to cut them. If a guy really surprises you, you're going to find a way to make a roster spot for them. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, the 49ers right now are in an unfortunate situation because they need a body in that quarterback room. And that's the unfortunate reality. But they also have 3 quarterbacks that they believe they're capable of, and it's unrealistic to go with 4 quarterbacks when only 25% of the league goes with 3 quarterbacks
Yeah.
itself. And so that's the reality, which is why, again, depending on how the board ends up going, they could look for an undrafted guy. It's just you have to pose the question, understanding they've met with a ton of good quarterbacks in the class in the mid to late rounds, and they do have guys who I'm sure they are fans of on their board, and they could see as a potential backup in the future.
I think, one of the things that's real important, I agree with you. They've met with 3rd and 4th round target guys. They've also met with 7th undrafted round target guys as well. Tim DeMora out of Fordham, Tyson Baggett out of Shepherd. So, look, if one of those 3rd round guys falls to the 5th round, I get it. I understand. It makes sense. But if they don't, then you have those guys later that you could pick up at the 7th or you could pick up as an undrafted free agent. If I had my way, this is just my own personal opinion, I would prefer a 7th round quarterback pick this draft. That's what I would want. That way you get your guy, you bring him in, whatever else. And not that I expect it to be a Brock Purdy 2.0 situation. I do not. I hope we never have that many quarterbacks get hurt again to where we have to be in that situation. But you do need another arm. And 7th rounder, if it doesn't work out, not too concerned.
Exactly. And the thing I'll say with 7th rounders that people might not realize initially, when you're drafting a player in the 7th round, you're not necessarily drafting a player in the 7th round. What do I mean by that? Teams in the 7th round, they're already in contact with these players well ahead, looking to gauge their interest for undrafted free agency should they not make undrafted free agency. The reason the 49ers drafted Brock Purdy, it was not only because he was high on their board at that time, but also they weren't sure they were going to be able to get him an undrafted free agency. And so by drafting the player, you're assuring yourself that you're guaranteeing yourself that you're going to be able to get that player on your team. That's the point of drafting in that 7th round. And so if the 49ers go ahead and get a quarterback in the 7th round, they might like the guy, but not be able to pay the amount of money or the opportunity that some other team might be able to provide. That's where they come in. They're able to draft the player in the 7th round, have all assurances that they get that player overall.
Yeah, and I think, I've talked to players that have been on this situation with the 49ers that were undrafted free agents, that were drafted, and the phone call sounds something like this. Hey, we're up on the clock and so picks, and we want to take you. There's a couple other guys we're looking at as well. If for some reason it doesn't go the way we want to and we can't pick you, would you be interested in coming in as an undrafted free agent? That's the phone call. And again, these are players that did not get picked, but still came. And these are players that were picked. And so every NFL team does that. And so they're
Right.
calling them in the 6th round saying, hey, we want you, but if for some reason something crazy happens, we just want to let you know we want you in as a UDFA.
I agree. I agree. And with that said, let's transition to an interesting topic, one that we touched on a little bit ago. But Brandon Ayuk. So there have been some trade rumors regarding Brandon Ayuk this entire offseason. He obviously liked a picture with the New York Giants and different things like that. Seem like rumors are shut down of that trade, at least for 2024. What did you take away from the Lynch comments, not only for this year, but also for beyond this year, where he addressed the uncertainties with their cap situation, which might obviously place an emphasis on what they do with Brandon Ayuk?
Yeah. So 2 things. Number 1, he basically said we're going to wait till after the draft to figure out the 5th-year option, which I think is smart with Javon Kinlaw and Ayuk. My assumption is they're going to pick up Ayuk's. They are not going to pick up Javon Kinlaw's. But he went on to say, and I quote, "We love Brandon Ayuk and are excited for him to be a part of this team." Like, end quote. Why would you move off your number 1 wide receiver? And I think that he is the number 1 wide receiver. Whenever you have all these young, questionable quarterbacks, continuity is important, and his cap hit's so tiny this year. It just seems too simple. It just seems too simple. If the Niners were rebuilding and not a playoff team, I would totally get trading Brandon Ayuk. They are the antithesis of that. They are the front runners in the NFC. Why would you trade an asset that's so young, that just proved himself? He's going to be here. He's not going anywhere.
I agree. At the moment, I think that even if it came down to picking between the two, I think Ayuk would be the guy. Obviously, that situation we'll see when it comes down to 2024, but the more important part, he's going to be here, I believe, in 2023. I think that that's the important scenario that we got. Greg Khan shared a comment earlier today. 15 first rounders in this draft, according to Peters. This has kind of been the consensus, around 13 to 15 first rounders in this class. What do they mean by this? Obviously, not 15 players, or only 15 players are going to be selected, but teams only have 15 first round grades. And I know this might not be 49ers related because we picked at 99, but how intriguing do you think this first round is going to be, with the understanding of how teams only, like, really that upper echelon players, you're going to have to be in that top 15 to get them, top 10 maybe even to get them. And then after that, you're drafting players that are lower on your board than where you're drafting, but you might not be able to get a trade.
Yeah, it's a rough draft at the top. I'm just going to be honest with you. And to put this into perspective, like Adam Peters has 15, right? I have 23. Now, a big difference between Adam Peters and John Chapman is I don't take players off my board. So if I watch a player and grade a player, I'm keeping them on there. So for the 49ers, they're taking players off that don't fit their zone scheme style. They're taking players off that don't do their, defensive zone style, not 3-4 type players defensively, right? So, like, that's the difference. And again, if we're putting Ayuk in this draft, he's my number 1 wide receiver. So people are like, oh, we could trade and just get another wide receiver. I'm taking Brandon Ayuk over anybody in this draft. The one player that would be close to me would be Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's a slot only guy. He's not a number 1 wide receiver at all because he's not somebody that's a threat vertically. So, like, you mean to tell me you're trading Brandon Ayuk, who I have, over Jackson Smith-Njigba? There is nobody that I would take in this draft. Maybe Quentin Johnson because he fits the scheme, but I do not want Quentin Johnson. I'd love him, but not in place of, Brandon Ayuk. So teams go out and, like we said, Peter says they got 15 first round grades. That 31 players have to go in the first round.
Right.
Period. So a lot of those guys getting drafted the back end of the first round, they're going to be second round players or second round grades for teams. For example, I'll just throw this up there. Darnell Washington, the amazing tight end. I have a second round grade on him. I fully expect him to go in the first round. Doesn't mean he's a first round grade. It does mean he was selected in the first round. That's the difference.
And I'll share one other thing. This class is going to be more exemplified, but I do think this happens a little more in terms of reaching on second round play or second round grades in the first round more than often because the board dictates itself. But when there are runs on positions, you
Mhm.
see teams looking to grab that position more so at positions of need like
Shanahan said
offensive
that
tackle.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, offensive tackle, really the more premier positions, you see the run on them, and then you see players being drafted that might go earlier because you don't want to lose out on that player, or you lose out on a player at that position by the time the board comes around to your next pick. And so that's what I think could be seen very much in this class. You talked about Darnell Washington. Really, it depends. Where does the run on tight end start? Because once one tight end goes, teams obviously have that on higher alert. Tight end's gone. If we want to core that top, whatever's on their board, top four, top five, you might have to pick earlier than later, and that's where you might.
Uh-oh.
There we go.
We went for
But
a tour there.
you might see a little, the top three tight ends maybe go in that first round or so.
Mhm. Yeah, and you've got to be able to follow that. And one of the things that I took the most away from the interview was Lynch said they tried to trade up last year. That they had two edge guys that they
Right.
liked. We know it's Drake Jackson. I want to say the second's Nick Bonito. He said, I'm not going to say his name here, but I'm telling you right now, it's Nick Bonito out of Oklahoma. And he said, we tried trading up, but nobody wanted to. Nobody wanted to trade back with us. So we stayed there. Sure enough, the guy was there. Niners did 0 trades last year. 0 for the first
Right.
time in this front office. I do not expect that. I expect to trade up in the third round and to trade back. That's what I expect.
And I remember this last year. Hasn't necessarily been substantiated, but I remember this last year, post draft in the second round, Lynch talked about how everything happened, how a team jumped them and drafted the player they wanted right before them. And that was Cam Taylor Britt with the Cincinnati Bengals. This happens. And that's why it's a little tougher in the NFL because remember, to trade, you need you need a trade suitor to go up and a trade suitor to go down. That's why
Yep.
I'm intrigued in this class because when there are 15 first round grades in that back end of the first round, teams might wanting to be trade down. They might want to trade down, but you need a suitor to come up and select a player on the board. And that might not be there as much with a class where people don't necessarily have a first round grade on that certain player.
And just to put this into perspective, I'm looking at my board currently. I don't have a big grade difference from the number 28 player all the way down to the number 60 player. Like they're
Yeah, that makes sense.
relatively close.
That makes
And
sense.
so I don't know, man. The value's there late. So if one of your 15 guys that right, we're sticking with this thing, there's 15 49ers first round grades. If one of those guys happens to fall, then you go up. If not, then yeah, you just sit there and take your time and enjoy your day.
Yeah, and, the one thing I'll say to that is that's why I think this draft's a little more to the 49ers' benefit. It's similar in a way to last year's class. It's different in that I thought that last year top end talent was definitely better, but it's similar to last year's class in that the the bread and butter of the class is in the middle rounds where it's a deeper class. You can see, um, a good amount of talented players falling. Last year, I had guys graded in the third round that the 49ers took in the sixth round or fifth round or whatever it was. And so you definitely have a ton of talented players that are available here. And so that's what I'm intrigued about. How do the 49ers like what falls to them? What do they do in difference of last year where they essentially stayed pat? This year they have 11 picks. What are they going to do? Are they going to try and move up? I even think that there's a good possibility they look to trade down, try and accumulate assets in that 102 to 155 range where they don't currently have any. Maybe they experiment a trade up. If that's there, you take it. If not, trading down with one of those three third round picks to get picks in that 102 to 155 range might be a little more accessible for them.
Yeah, I like the cluster picks just because it makes it easier when we're doing like mock drafts and trying to do these projections. But not having to pick for 100 straight picks from the third to the fifth round, I think that's problematic. I don't think the Niners are going to stay that way. I really want to see a trade back from the third or a trade up from the fifth. I know we've been great in the fifth, but that's a long way to have no picks. And so I think that window
Yeah.
is going to be closed.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Going forward with some of the things that Lynch talked about real quick, gave a little update on Nick Bosa. Talked about the comment. I think that that's going a little viral is that he said essentially there was never a hotline, sharing how Nick Bosa was untouchable. There's not a chance that he's going to move on him. Talk about that portion and also the timeline of where you might see a Nick Bosa extension.
Yeah, it's going to be right at the start of training camp when they report. The 49ers have set precedent, and the reason why they have done this isn't for guys like Nick Bosa, it's for guys like Debo. If they didn't already have that precedent and stick that precedent in place, things like Debo will happen again and again and again. But the Niners are sitting here saying, look, this is defensive player of the year. We're not even entering into negotiations until later, till after the draft. That's the big reason why. Why? Because then the player loses all leverage. If a player wants to demand a trade now, they could say, sorry, we can't even get a draft pick this year. You're going to have to find a player only trade. Those are hard to do. It just makes it, again, this is a leverage of the organization against the players to get what they want. And that is to get their own guys signed that they want to keep. That's why you're not going to hear anything. Nick Bosa's not going anywhere. You're not trading the best player, an amazing locker room guy with one of the best work ethics and whatever. Bosa going to be around a long time. And then we will have this conversation again next year with Ayuk. But again, even if the Ayuk deal gets done, it's not going to be until next training camp, not even this one, because they keep staggering these.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I talk about these, I agree with you. The team, they're trying to get their setup too, but the player as well. A lot of times, this offseason might be a little different in that Bosa doesn't necessarily have much competition within this offseason. But a lot of times, you see these different players at the same position competing to get the best deal possible. Last year with Debo Samuel, it was the wide receiver room, and so when that happens, obviously somewhat of a waiting game. You're trying to get the best deal possible. The best deal normally comes after the first deals slide through because you have a benchmark for what you could probably argue in your deal, depending on how well your resume stacks to other teams. 49ers have seen this. Fred Warner, obviously, with Darius Leonard, that was a thing. George Kittle, he was trying to essentially reset the market. That was a thing. Trent Williams obviously had his deal, and I think David Bakhtiari had his deal as well around the same time. That was a thing. And then obviously last year, Debo Samuel and the three other wide receivers from that class that all got paid. That was also a thing. So it's definitely the two different things. Lynch also referred to how the Bosa family works. I mean, Joey Bosa had a record-breaking contract. The guaranteed money at signing prior to him was $62 million for a defensive end. Joey Bosa got a $78 million
Yeah.
signing, guaranteed at signing, a $16 million increase. You see like 100K increase, 200K increase, these incremental increases. Joey Bosa got a hell of a deal. And so, Nick Bosa, you're expecting a pretty significant deal. Now, remember, don't get too shocked when AAV numbers get floated out
Yeah.
upwards
It's
of
going to be a
30
lot.
million. That is a lot, but remember, it's guaranteed money at signing, guaranteed for injury. Those are the numbers that really matter alongside signing bonus to determine how the cap hit works. Because as we've seen with some of these big deals, you don't normally see the last year, the last 2 years of these extended contracts because there's no guaranteed money over the last 2 years. Players obviously don't want to play without that guaranteed money available. And so you see a contract restructure or a contract extension or some sort of thing, maybe even a trade that surfaces because players obviously don't want to play under contracts with no guaranteed money. But the way that these contracts are inflated, the guaranteed money comes in the beginning, but the significant cap hits come at the end.
Right. And, I'll say this. One of my favorite things about Bosa, it doesn't matter who's brought up every year. Whoever the number one pass rusher, they're like, oh, I'll get this, DM or whatever. We should trade Nick Bosa for Will Anderson. We should trade him for Chase Young. We should trade, right. It happens. It happens. It happens. The thing
Yeah,
that separates Bosa, and I think I brought this up on my last show, is that he doesn't win with elite athleticism. That's not his thing. He's a tactician. This is somebody that's going to be successful for a very, very, very long time. And so Bosa needs to be written in ink for the next 6 to 7 years. And I really hope they do a longer deal. I don't know what Bosa and his family want, but man, I want like a 6-year deal. I don't want a 3-year, a 4-year. All right. 5-year. Now we're talking 6-year. John Chapman's in. I want as many years as possible on Bosa personally. I
I
really hope
think the
they spread it out.
49ers want the same thing too. Obviously, I don't anticipate a 6-year deal happening, but I mean, if it can, that would be the best situation for the 49ers.
It's just, man, you keep the top end talent, defensive player of the year, but like, the sacks and all the pressures and all that stuff, that's where he's going to get paid. But I don't know of another player. Cameron Jordan's probably the closest thing that I can come up with that is as good in the run as he is in the pass. And he's way better against the pass than Cameron Jordan is. And Jordan's like an all decade player. That dude's awesome
Right.
for the Saints, but Bosa's better in every caveat, which is just bananas. Um, Really, really big fan of who Bosa is on the field and as a teammate and just a goober. And his press conferences are hilarious. Like the dude has just fit in, and those are the guys you want to keep. You do whatever you can. He's not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere.
I agree. I agree. Enough about Nick Bosa. Let's go to the second quarterback that we've got to talk about. That's Brock Purdy. Got some updates, obviously, on his recovery. Still a good amount of way to go, but encouraging signs. Saying he's hitting all the benchmarks. What did you take away from John Lynch and his comments on Brock Purdy, competition, and all that?
Yeah, I mean, this is, three separate things that we've seen of Brock Purdy in the past like 48 hours. He was at the A's game. I'm sorry. He not the A's game. I'm sorry. He was at the
The
Giants game. I
Giants game.
apologize.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get canceled for that one. But that was awesome. No brace, waved, high fived, whatever else. Then he was on the Kelsey Brothers podcast, which I think I got a lot more from that than the John Lynch thing. And then you had Lynch saying that he looks good. But the constant thing I keep saying, and the doctors and the team and Purdy all keep saying the same thing, that first week of June, that's that 3-month check-in where they go back in, and that's where the next timeline's set. And what's so important about all of this? Why would you trade a quarterback 5 weeks before the checkup? like that. And so this is just a wait and see approach. But the one thing that we do know for sure, he is not behind schedule. There have not been any setbacks. Things seem to be trending towards a very, very positive checkup here in 5 more weeks. So we're about halfway to the 3-month mark. We'll see how much longer we got to go. But right now, everything looks great. And I hope it continues to be that way.
Right. And obviously we'll see how the process goes along. But great news to hear from Brock Purdy that he is on stage with his recovery. Now, again, we get more clarity at that 12-week mark, and it's still uncertain necessarily as to when he'll return to practice in full, meaning when does that arm strength really build up back to 100% and things like that, as was the case with Nick Mullins. If it's 6 months, it puts him around week 1. Does he play week 1? That's the uncertain part. I'd assume at the moment, no, based on not only that it quite literally is the week going into week 1, but also we've heard major media people such as Matt Barrows and others also suggesting that Lance right now seems like the favorite to start week 1. That discussion, though, we wait and see in the offseason. Wishing all the best and hope that a competition can arise if possible.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, it's having 2 good quarterbacks or 3 good quarterbacks, that's okay. No problem with that whatsoever. So the 49ers have options currently. They're all cheap. They're all cheap. That's what's important. And so if one of them can take the reins, that's going to be awesome. But yeah, we just got to wait and see. Let it play out. Let it play out.
One thing I do want to mention, Ark Armstead. So he talked. He talked as well today. He said how a move to edge rusher hasn't been discussed. Now the 49ers signed Javon Hargrave. Talk to me about the idea of it. Your idea on how realistic it is. Understanding the 49ers added at defensive tackle rather than defensive end this
It's
offseason more.
Yeah, it's the deepest position on this team. It's the deepest position on this team. And if you remember last year heading into the initial 53-man roster, the cut downs after preseason, we had 4 defensive tackles injured. We were picking up guys off the streets. And so definitely a reactive kind of, going against that. But now, I mean, your starters are Hargrave and Armstead. That's incredible. Then your backups are Javon Kinlaw and the guy who started last year for us, right? Out of Pitt State. So, like, you've got those 4 guys. You have Kalia Davis, who you drafted the 6th round. He's coming back. You signed Ty McGill. I mean, the Niners are set at defensive tackle. They're just completely set there. And anything you get from Javon Kinlaw is just gravy now. He could be a rotational piece that comes in and just be fine. But you have two defensive tackles that, if you look at the last 5 years, it's pretty damn hard to find anybody that got more snaps than them. And Eric Armstead, who was banged up a little bit last year, but if you look at the last 5 years as a whole, that dude went 4 straight years without missing a game. Javon Hargrave missed 1 game his whole career, I believe. So you're talking about these guys that just take a lot of snaps, and, the Niners rotate a lot, but gosh, it's going to be great having the strength at that position instead of just being so vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree on that portion of it, right? In that right now, I think they've got all options on the table because normally we haven't had the flexibility at defensive tackle. Granted, Ark Armstead has looked pretty damn solid at defensive tackle when he's been on the field. But to me, I think you have that option. Defensive tackle right now is a stronger position for the 49ers with the depth they have. Not maybe even with the high end talent with the top 2 guys, but with the depth they have, you've got a lot of options possible. Nicholas
Yeah.
Para, go
Oh,
ahead.
the Godfather.
Hey, appreciate the super chat here. Hey, John and Rohan, great to see you guys collaborating. Last year, we were all Vegas bound for the draft. Do we know where the draft is next year? Are we going? Because we are going to see pick 32 live. Now, I know this year's in Kansas City. If I will check right now where the 2024 NFL draft is going to be, but that would be an interesting one, obviously. And it seems, okay, it's going to be in Detroit.
Yeah. I don't like it.
That'll be an interesting one.
I don't like it, but that's okay. Yeah, I was planning on being in Kansas City this week. We had a venue set up and everything, and we were already starting to reach out to players and all that stuff. Like last year, we had Fred Warner and Elijah Mitchell come out in Vegas, which was awesome. But we'll see. Maybe I'll reach out to Demo because he played up there. Demo and Ambry Thomas are both from rival high schools up in Detroit. I didn't think about that, but I'd like to be there. That was just such a cool event. So.
Are you going this year to Kansas City or
No,
not?
when we did the CMC trade, I went ahead and backed out everything.
Sense.
We didn't have the pick,
yeah.
so.
But next year, hopefully for the first time, we'll have a first round pick in a while. So that'll be
Gosh,
cool.
I miss it. I miss it.
Yeah. But hey, John, it's been a very fun hour here talking with you. A lot of different topics. And I mean, the most exciting part's the draft is just 3 days away. I know the 49ers, we've got a lot to talk about there, but I'm very intrigued to see how this draft overall goes along.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, man. I'm excited. Rohan, you're the best there is, man. And it's always fun just hanging out and talking. So thank you for your time, man, and for letting me jump on with you. This is fun.
Yes, sir. Last thing I got to say is you've got to make sure you subscribe here. Both channels, John Chapman, obviously, the 49ers Rush podcast. Be sure to check out his work as well as his stuff on Patreon. I know you guys, a lot of people like the draft content. I'm sure a lot's on there. Be sure as well to subscribe here over on my channel. Links are in the description, so be sure to check that out. Go ahead and give that subscribe button. Hit the like button. We really appreciate all of you guys' support. But chat, you guys were great today. Any last thoughts before we head on out, John?
Enjoy this week. Find ways to be excited. The draft is a beautiful time because all 32 teams have hope for the future. We only know one team has hope in the NFC, and that's the Niners. Enjoy this week. Enjoy it.
Love it. Guys, that's going to do it all for today. Be sure to stay tuned because we'll have some more content coming out soon, especially on the draft. Stay tuned for John's show Thursday and Friday. But we'll see you guys next time.